class we are discussing about the Feb 2020 budget. Okay, so basically budget highlights. So we have our previous videos based on the previous budget which was presented in July 2019, and here this is an updation on that video with the recent data. Okay, so this is based on the Feb 2020 budget. So we know that budget 2020-21 reflects the government's firm commitment to substantially boost investment in agriculture, social sector, education and health. And this is substantiated by increase in expenditure of 3,43,678 crores over revenue expenditure of 2019-20 while keeping the fiscal deficit at 3.8% of GDP. Okay, so when we take the budget 2021, we will get an idea that the government is having a firm decision or firm policy to boost the investments in agriculture, social sector, education and health, and that is clearly evident through the revenue expenditure, which is substantially increased through 3,43,678 crore over the 2019-20 budget. Okay, so now we are going to the budget at a glance. So here we have the revenue receipts total amount with the components, capital receipts the total amount with the component, and the total receipts taking the summation of the revenue receipts and the capital receipts, and we have the total expenditure which is the summation of the items coming under like revenue account, of which interest payment, grants in aid, of capital account, all these things, and we have the revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit, fiscal deficit and primary deficit, which is calculated from the revenue receipt, capital receipts, total receipts and total expenditure. Okay, so here we can have a comparison between the actual estimate, revised estimate as well as the budget estimate. We have the 2018-19 data which is the actual estimate, 19-20 data which is the revised estimate, and 2021 data which is the budget estimate. So based on that we have the calculation of the deficit statistics. So see, for moving on to the deficit statistics, let's see how the rupee comes from and rupee goes to when the budget is taken into consideration. So when 1 rupee is taken into consideration, that 1 rupee comes from borrowings and liabilities, corporation tax, income tax, customs, union excise duties, goods and service tax, non-tax revenue and non-debt capital receipts. So when we take the 1 rupee coming to the budget, the major proportion is coming from the borrowings and other liabilities. Then the next is from the corporation tax and the goods and service tax, then from the income tax, then from the non-tax revenue, then we have the union excise duties, then non-debt capital receipts, and last the customs. So that is how the rupee comes to the budget. So how the rupee is being spent, how the rupee goes to, when the rupee is being spent, we have the state share of taxes and duties which have the major proportion which has so out of the 1 rupee, 20 paisa is going to the state share of taxes and duties. So as per the 15th Finance Commission, we know that the central shares to the state has been increased to 42%, which is the largest increase in the share. Okay, so as per the 15th Finance Commission, since that tax share from central to state has increased to 42%, when the rupees expenditure has been considered, out of the 1 rupee the major proportion goes to state share of taxes and duties. Then we have the interest payments, the next expenditure, the next way how the rupee goes to is to the interest payment. Then comes the center sector schemes, then we have the finance commission and other transfers as well as the other expenditure. Then we have the central sponsored schemes with the 9 paise, then the defense, then the subsidies and pension with 6 paise. So this is how the rupee goes to. So advisable to know where the rupee comes from and where rupee goes to, and what is the proportion of 1 rupee which has been allocated through various aspects. So when the rupee comes from, we have the borrowings and liability, corporation tax, income tax, customs, union excise duty, goods and service tax, non-tax revenue and non-debt capital receipts. Out of that, the major proportion comes from the borrowings and other liability as well as the GST along with the corporation tax. Then when we consider the expenditure, the rupee goes to the major proportion going to the state share of taxes and duties, and then the interest payment. Then we have the central sector schemes, and the least is to the pensions and the subsidies, that is 6%. So that is is how the rupee comes from and rupees goes to as according to the budget 2021 which was presented in February. So now we have the deficit statistics. Okay, so here when the deficit statistics is taken, we know that the fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit, primary deficit all are calculated based on the total expenditure and the total receipts. So based on the values from the total expenditure and the total receipts, we are calculating these deficits. So as per the recent budget 2021, as per the budget estimate, we have the fiscal deficit is 3.5. Okay, so have a comparison here. We have 2018-19, the actual estimate, the fiscal deficit was 3.4, and when we take the 2019-20 budget estimate, it was 3.3. Okay, so compare the budget estimate of 2019-20 and 2020-21. In budget 2019-20, the budget estimate of fiscal deficit is 3.3, and 2020-21, the budget estimate is the fiscal deficit as per the budget estimate is 3.5, and the revised estimate of 2019-20 is 3.8. Okay, so budget estimate of 2019-20 was 3.3 and the revised estimate of the 2019-20 is 3.8, and when we compare the budget estimate of 19-20 and 20-21, in 19-20 it was 3.3 and in 20-21 it is 3.5. So the reason why we have made the budget estimate 3.5, maybe the revised estimate we are able revised estimate as per the data is 3.8. Okay, so we know that there is a huge increase in the revenue expenditure as per the budget 2021 by focusing on the development or the substantial growth in the education, health and the various sectors of the country. Okay, so here the fiscal deficit budget estimate 2021 is 3.5. And moving on to the revenue deficit, so we know that when we take the value, the ratio is basically the FD will be greater than the revenue deficit, and that will be greater than the effective revenue deficit, and effective revenue deficit will be greater than the primary deficit. So that is how the trend will be, and the formula for calculating these deficits is common, and which we have a detailed video regarding the calculations of deficits. You can refer for the form to know how to calculate FD, RD, effective revenue deficit and the primary deficit. So now we are going to discuss what is the budget estimate of revenue deficit in 2020-21. So the budget estimate of revenue deficit in 2020-21 is 2.7, whereas the revised estimate of 2019-20 was 2.4. Okay, so this is the, but as per the 2021 we have the budget estimate revenue deficit as 2.7. So see, compare the budget estimate of 19-20 and 2021. The budget estimate of 19-20 was 2.3, but when it was revised it became 2.4. So the budget estimate of 2021 is 2.7. So the difference is in 2019-20 budget estimate 2.3 and 2021 the budget estimate of revenue deficit is 2.7. Okay, moving on to the next one, that is effective revenue deficit. So we have the budget estimate of 19-20, that is 1.3, and the revised estimate of the 19-20 is 1.5. So when we take the budget estimate of 2021 with respect to effective revenue deficit, the value is 1.8. Okay, so it's very important to know these values. Fiscal deficit budget estimate of 2021 3.5, revenue deficit the budget estimate of 2021 2.7, and effective revenue deficit as per the budget estimate of 2021 it is 1.8. And next thing is the primary deficit. So the budget estimate is 0.4. So budget estimate of 2021. Based on that, the primary deficit is 0.4. So now just compare the budget estimate of 19-20 and 2021. The budget estimate of 19-20 with reference to the primary deficit was 0.2. But 2021 the budget estimate is 0.4, and the revised estimate, that is also important. So even though the budget estimate in 19-20 when it comes to the primary deficit was 0.2, the revised estimate became 0.7. So here now the budget estimate is 0.4. So it is very important to know the difference, comparative analysis between these values, and should be able to know what is the current budget estimate of these fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit and the primary deficit. So fiscal deficit is 3.5, revenue deficit is 2.7, effective revenue deficit is 1.8 and primary deficit is 0.4. These values are important from the examination point of view. Also along with that, it is advisable to know the revised estimates of 19-20 also. Okay, so here we have the deficit trends based on the, so here see here from the data is available in 2008-9 to 2020-21. So when we take the last two we will understand. This is the revised estimate of 1920 and this is the budget estimate of 2021, and we have the data based on the all the other years from 2008 to 2019 also. So if you see that, we know that this one is the fiscal deficit, then the revenue deficit, then this one effective revenue deficit, and this one is the primary deficit. So the trend is always FD greater than RD greater than effective revenue deficit greater than the primary deficit. So that is the trend, and so you see here we can see the revised estimate of 1920 and the budget estimate of 2021. So the revised estimate of 1920 was 3.8 and the budget estimate of 2021 is 3.5 when it comes to the fiscal deficit. And when we take the revenue deficit, the revised estimate of 1920 is 2.4 and budget estimate of 2021 is 2.7. And when we take effective revenue deficit, the revised estimate of 1920 is 1.5 and budget estimate of 2021 is 1.8. And last, the primary deficit, which is basically calculated when we take the primary deficit, we have it the 0.7 when we consider the revenue when we take the revised estimate of 1920, and it is 0.4 when we take the budget estimate of 2021. So always should be knowing the revised estimate of 1920 and the budget estimate of 2021 from the examination point of view. So these there are chances where questions can be asked based on the revenue estimate of 1920 and the budget estimate of 2021. So that should be known. So now we are going to discuss about the sources of deficit financing. So we already had a video on the various sources of deficit financing, and now this is based on the recent data. So based on the February 2020 budget, let's see which are the sources of deficit financing. So here we have various sources are securities against small saving, other receipts which are the internal debt and the public account, then the drawdown of cash balance, state provident fund, external debt and the market borrowings. These are the various sources of deficit financing. So here in this side we are representing the source of financing except the market borrowing, and here we are having the market borrowings. So when we compare it, we have the data from 2016-17 to the budget estimate of 2021. So you see, understand that the market borrowing is basically when we consider the source of deficit financing, market borrowing is basically more than the 5 lakh crores. Okay, so it is represented in crores, whereas we have the securities against small savings, which is value which is just more than the 2 lakh crore but less than the 2,50,000 crores. So that is how that is how we are expressing the sources of deficit financing based on the budget estimate of 2021. Okay, so then we have the state provident fund and the other receipts. So when we compare the revised estimate of 1920 and the budget estimate of 2021, the state provident fund was greater than was a major source than the other receipts when the revised estimate of 1920 was considered. But in 2021 we have the state provident the other receipts more than the state provident fund. We explain as per the budget estimate of 2021, the other receipts is basically 50,000 crore and the state provident fund is basically a value less than 50,000 crore, so approximately 20,000 crore. Okay, so that is it. And here we have the external debt as well as the drawdown of cash balance in the budget estimate of 2021. So these are how various sources of deficit financing. So market borrowings the most, then we have the securities against small savings, we have the other receipts, state provident fund, drawdown of cash balance, etc. as the various sources of deficit financing, and this is basically the graphical representation of this. So here all this data we discussed is based on the recent budget 2020 February, which is presented by the Honorable Financial Minister, and we have discussed about the deficit statistics, the fiscal deficit, the revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit as well as the primary deficit, and also the sources of financing fiscal deficit and how the rupee comes from and how rupees goes to as per the recent budget. So that is it. This is very important from the examination point of view. Prepare well. Thank you.